All right, the Reds, it's another one-on-one show where we interview a celebrity Red or someone special, someone who's done something special but supports the mighty Reds. And Elvis Costello certainly fits the bill on that one. He didn't want to go to Chelsea, so we got him to come to Liverpool instead. We interviewed him in the studio before Christmas. I'm currently in Curly Music in Liverpool city centre, where Elvis once walked in and bought a ukulele. Who knows what he wrote on that, but I love little stories like that. I hope you do as well. And Elvis had plenty of lovely little stories in this interview. I hope you'll enjoy it. Start off from the start, really. Obviously, people will look at your history and heritage, if you like, and will say, oh, well, he's born down in London there, so why is he a Red? So tell everyone why you're a Red.
Well, my mum's from Smithdown Road,
That's
so
right.
my dad's from Birkenhead, and they were pretty fair about it when I was a kid. They took me 1 week to Liverpool, 1 week to Everton, let me sort myself out. My grandfather supported Tranmere, so, you know, we could have gone any way.
Yeah.
Liverpool in the second division, they won 5-0. Everton got beat 4-1 at home.
And that was it.
You know, when you're a kid, you go, I'm going to go with the side that's winning.
Yeah.
But, you know, they were still in the second division, where and it was very exciting to be a kid growing up as the team seemed to be just getting better and better. You know, they came up, then they won the league the next year, then they won the cup the year after that. And it just kept going like that. Yeah. By the time I was a young teenager, I was arranging every opportunity I could, you know, during the season. I'd come up and stay with my grandmother, sort of like get on the train, come up, see the game, and just always go for the same spot, go really early, left side of the Kop goal.
Yeah.
Always go for that spot. I don't know why, I just like that.
That was the thing about
I'm left-sided, you see, so I'd go to the left side of the goal.
The standing Kop, that was the thing with it,
it
wasn't it?
Yeah. I went in the middle of it a few times.
You had the spec.
But, you know, when you're a young teenager, you know, you're not really kind of built for the middle of the crowd. Yeah. I mean, I went in it and I realised why I didn't do that, you know. Yeah, no, you really had to be strong to survive in there, because, you know, you're just, the wind to be knocked out of you first time there was an attack, you know.
And what do you remember about you know, the sights, the smells, the sounds?
The sights and the smells, for sure, yeah. Yeah. Everybody says that, you know, but it was true, you know, I mean, and, you know, but it was great. There's no doubt that there's an experience that a young kid today will never have. I don't want to sound like one of those guys, I was better in my day, but there was something really, really special. And obviously, you know, the safety aspect that came into it later when people's, you know, because of Hillsborough, they had to rethink it. And as money came into it more, they wanted to attract more and more people who basically want to go to the theatre of football. You know, they don't want to be crushed up on a terrace. But you lack, you know, it's great the fact that the Kop still has an amazing feeling, and the sound of it is still as stirring as ever. But I think really if you could go back in time and experience what it was like to be in among it, or anywhere on that terrace, or anywhere in that ground when that was happening, it was definitely a different feeling, you know.
And there still is that thing, though, isn't it? That football fans
and you think
want
about
to
the
stand.
ground is a different dimension now. It's taller. You know, the old stand with the you know, the name of it, when you see the old pictures of it. I'm not being nostalgic, it had a different scale. I mean, the floodlights created shadows that they would never tolerate now, because you would say, well, that's probably going to affect the way you, but flight of the ball in the sun, you know, I mean, it's, you know, there's all sorts of aspects to every game, you know, the way in which you'd go see games where they would literally be like playing in the park. That it would be waterlogged and they'd be playing still, or they would be covered in snow. And I mean, it all made it interesting. I mean, you could, if your team got beat, you sort of said, well, it was because of that, you know. Sometimes it was.
What were the early sort of wow moments for you then, when you first started going as a Red?
You know, it's not individual games, it's all that are mixed up with it. You know, it's like the feeling of being at the games. And of course, also because I went to school in West London, you know, I had the opportunity sometimes go and see Liverpool. If we could get a ticket, we'd go and see them play at Chelsea or Fulham or something. That was probably those more. Later on, I'd go like further up, Arsenal and Tottenham, but West London was much easier for us, you know, because we lived out in the suburbs near the airport, you know.
Who were your early heroes then?
Definitely, I mean, the team that I grew up with as a little kid was Tommy Lawrence and Chris Lawler, Jerry Byrne, Willie Stevenson, Ronnie Yates, Jeff Strong, Ian Callaghan, Roger Hunt, you know, and Ian St John, Peter Thompson, that team, you know. And I remember running into Gordon Milne one day in London, you know, when he was managing Leicester, and he was just standing outside waiting for a cab outside a hotel, and I said, I saw you play, and he said, you don't look old enough. I said, believe me, I am. You know, I'd seen him play as well, and Jimmy Melia, you know, so, I mean, there was some, you know, Roger Hunt was my hero, for sure. I mean, I think it was something about him, the way he looked and everything. He looked like a drawing of a footballer.
Yeah.
Like if you did draw the Rovers, you'd have him as the model, wouldn't you? You know, he kind of looked sort of just right for a footballer in those days. And now we know the truth of it, they were getting paid very little, you know. I mean, I saw a documentary about the Bundesliga, about the beginning of that, and the team that played in the World Cup final against England in '66, those guys were semi-professional. It's unbelievable to think of it. Uwe Seeler was a sort of travelling salesman that carried his boots in the back of his BMW, you know. I mean, ridiculous, you know. And now if you think about the rewards of relatively average players, you know, they really did want to do it, you know.
Yeah, that's mad how it's boomed.
Yeah, and then of course as it grew, the back end of the transfer over to the Paisley era and the willingness of Shankly even to change the side, you know, even quite ruthlessly really, you know. I mean, that's when it became dominant, making that side, you know.
People always want to sort of compare eras and compare players and all that, and I'm glad that you mentioned Roger Hunt, because I've had the pleasure myself of interviewing him, and he's a lovely fella.
Oh, I'm so glad to, you know, I just never came my way to meet him, and you know, it's just somebody that I've just had so much admiration for, because as I got older and appreciated what it really took to play. And you realise that the players really didn't have, they were heroic to us, but they didn't have the rewards that later players had.
In terms of though the ability, the spectacle, the type of football you're watching, you know, you will have seen Hunt, then Rush, then Fowler, then Torres, then Suarez, you know, up to Mo Salah now. You know, where would you put Roger Hunt in terms of
well,
the ability?
it's hard to compare. You know, I had the opportunity to do fantasy football once. You know, do you remember that show?
Yeah.
And I agreed to do it because I was on with Alan Hansen. So I got to ask him the question. Said, who was the best player you ever played with? And I expected him to say Kenny, and he said Jan Malby. Now, you know, players are different. And I also asked him, like, would you beat the side of today if your side could somehow play at the peak of your ability, you could somehow play, what would happen? He said, we'd control the game for 80 minutes and they'd beat us in the last 10 minutes for fitness. So he acknowledged, like, the sports science parts of it was there's no doubt that the team that he played in was probably the most audacious Liverpool side until fairly recently. But the level of fitness among the players now, and the way it's all kind of scientific, makes it a different game. You know, you just look at the players. You look at a picture of a footballer and you go, Tommy Smith against, you know, Joe Gomez. You just look at them, you know, and you could be playing in the same position, a totally different shape of person, you know. It's like difference between, you know, a beast of labour and a racehorse. You know? I mean, they were just designed to do different things, you know.
Yeah, they're athletes.
But so it was really, you couldn't really sort of say. I mean, I think it's important as well, like, look at the amount of goals he scored, 42 goals in a season, Roger Hunt scored. So, yes, they were playing less games, and there's you know, people used to say from the 30s, you know, can I mention Everton? Dixie Dean, you know, 60 goals in a season. Nobody's ever done that. But it was a totally different game. You watch the black and white films of Stanley Matthews or Tom Finney and people like that. They're running rings around people, but you actually look at it, it's a lot slower, the game. They're wearing those big hobnail boots. They're wearing shirts that probably when they got wet weighed a ton, you know. Now every single aspect of the clothing they're wearing, the footwear, is all designed to make them more efficient. But they're also really brilliant players. I mean, the best of them are, you know.
I wanted to ask you about, I mean, you talk about football in a very romantic way, which I love, and that's how I am about the game as well still. I think it's harder to be like that now, I think, with the way some of it's spoken about, and sports science and statistics and all that. I still like the romantic side. And I think a romantic story very much that you were a part of was Alan Bleasdale's Scully, and your Scully's brother in that. And there might
typecast as somebody who doesn't speak, which is really unusual. I think Alan was having a joke that But yeah, I played the idiot brother of the family, and of course that was, you know, as far as I was concerned, that was like the next best thing to be in the Liverpool team, because...
How did it come about that?
Well, I've been friends with Alan since 1980, 81.
Oh, right, okay.
So, you know, we were great pals, and then he wrote this part, and he said, I was in the Scully, and I was in a film that he made, so I got an opportunity. Can't really call it acting. But I mean, as far as I was concerned, the fact that Andrew Schofield ran out in the opening credits to my song, Turning the Town Red, was the next best thing that I would ever get to running out with, you know, at Anfield. And the fact that Kenny Dalglish had a bit part in it as the fantasy of the main character was, again, like I'd been in a team with Kenny, because there I was in the cast, you know. I was wearing number 8, he was wearing, you know, number 10.
Yeah.
You know?
No, it's superb. And did you get to meet Kenny, and Graham Souness is in it, isn't he, as well?
I didn't at the time, no. I did later, and of course that was the start of the conversation, that we acted together. Well, not literally, but you know, we were in the same cast, so that was a good you know, a good talking point.
Well, I was going to say that as well. I mean, you know, first and foremost, obviously you're a famous musician and everyone knows who you are, but also you're very much a football fan. And I've read about you before where you've said, you know, you still do that thing that football fans can do, where you meet your hero and you're a bit like, wow, you know. And
well, I did. When I first met Kenny, I you know, we were at a Paul McCartney show, and we were sort of the two guests of honour sort of thing, you know, that we got the word just before the end of the show, come to the back of the hall. It's a Wembley Arena show, and Paul wants to say goodnight. So Paul runs off the stage, and you know, he's really friendly, and he says goodnight to both of us, and so there's just the two of us standing there in this deserted loading bay at Hammersmith, at Wembley Arena. And we're looking at each other, and I said, well, maybe we can go for a drink now, you know. And I said, I'm going to say something to you now that I'm sure everybody said. And I maybe thought I was going to say something about one of his goals. And I said, I just don't know how you don't play Peter Beardsley. You know, it did exactly the typical fan thing of going, he was manager by then, and he wasn't playing Beardsley, and I couldn't understand why. But, you know, he just rolled his eyes. It would be the same as somebody asking me, like, a really obvious question about music, you know. And like, but he was really great. And, you know, I think that everybody's had that experience. If you get the opportunity, you just go blank, you know, with whether it's music or sport or anything else that you're really into. It's really difficult if you meet the people you admire, you know.
In more recent times as well, I saw you popped up, you were with Peter Moore, and you popped up on one of the Inside Anfield videos.
Yeah, well, that was very kind of Peter. They had me as their guest on my birthday. I've never asked the club for anything, you know. And, you know, it's really true to say that when our records were in the charts in the late 70s, early 80s, and it was like I was in pop music full time, so to speak. I mean, I'm in music now. I don't think of it being, I'm not in competition with the latest releases. I never did ask for anything. I never asked for tickets or anything. And I don't think really it would have mattered anyway, because footballers famously don't have terribly good taste in music, certainly not in those days. You know, it was like, they might like Phil Collins, but they didn't really like what we were doing, you know. Yeah. So it wouldn't have made any difference. So they had me as a guest, and they were very generous, and I came with my wife, and my boys had just turned 13, and they're not yet hooked on Liverpool. I'm trying to get them indoctrinated, you know, because they go to school in Canada where they're playing all sorts of other sports. But they know that Dad gets up early, sometimes very early in the morning. You know, that's one of the things of living far from home, is that if it's a you know, it's a midday kickoff, you're getting up at 4 a.m. to watch the game. And people that watch all over the world will know what that's like, you know, like whether it's, you know, if you're in Singapore or if you're in Australia. I mean, I was following the season where we came within this of winning the title. I was following those games in New Zealand. I mean, it can be really hilarious, but the lengths you go to see the game. You're traveling along on a bus they have a satellite signal to the bus, and you're watching the game, and you go into an area where there's no reception, you know, and you lose it, and then you're looking on the BBC site, and you're having to hit refresh every few seconds to see what the score is, or following on the Liverpool website on the commentary, which I love, because particularly when Aldo is the summariser, because he's so completely biased.
Oh, yeah.
But also like, God, why did he do that? You know, when there's somebody who does a pass that he doesn't approve of, you know. I mean,
we forget this when we, you know, because we're fortunate that we get to go sort of week in, week out, and you forget about sometimes that. But we've been fortunate to go to Australia and meet fans over there.
Yeah.
They've told us all this, you know, getting up in the middle of the night, watching a game, and then having to go to work.
I mean, I used to listen to on the, you know, on like a little radio when the BBC was the place where you could get the commentaries, and I'd be in Hamburg or somewhere, you know, climbing up the curtains trying to get a signal to the short wave or the long wave or whatever wave it was, you know, and however he could get it. So in some ways, I really do like commentary on a radio or now an internet connection. There's something about an audio commentary that's very exciting, because you hear a cheer and you go for a second, did that go in or is that a near miss? And I think why I like it is it reminds me of when I first went to the game as a young teenager, and I'd be in the Cop End, particularly a midweek game, where it was dark and maybe misty. You know, you couldn't always see when you were attacking the Anfield Road end whether the ball had gone in. You'd have to wait for the reaction. So it was a little bit like listening on the radio. There was a split second where your heart's in your mouth. Did it go in or not? You know, and the same when the opposing side were attacking at that end. You know, yet you didn't know whether they'd equalised or they'd taken the lead. There was something, you know, as much as everybody would like to be in the perfect spot to see everything, and that's really great when you can get that opportunity. And you see the whole diagram of the game, you know. I don't think you can sometimes appreciate some players until you go to the game, because the camera follows the ball.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you don't see the players that are running off the ball. Or, you know, I remember there was a tremendous game. I was at Anfield for a 3-3 draw with United, where I think we were 3 down and got back. It was one of those games.
Yeah.
You know, it was in the Cantona era, and like
Ruddock scored, Clough scored.
Yeah, and you'd watch somebody like Eric Cantona, was an amazing player when he was on the ball, and you realise that for long periods of the game he didn't do anything. And you go, well, that would be the weakness, now be perceived as a weakness now, that he didn't do anything else except when he was on the ball. When he was on the ball, he was deadly. And I'm sure you know, if you go week in, week out, you know players have that weakness, you know. But now it seems as if every player is so tuned and so, you know, they're so fit that they're all running, and they're in this particular system that they're playing at the moment. Everybody is playing for everybody. Somebody's got a role. You see when you go to the game, you see more of the diagram of the way a player goes back and covers when the backs go up for the dead balls. You know, much more organised than it ever seemed to be. Yeah. You know, like you can watch other clubs as well trying to play the same system of feeding it out to the fullbacks overlapping, and just not happening because they don't have the skill.
You mentioned the challenge of sort of being abroad and trying to follow the Reds. You've also had the challenge, obviously, of your own career and, you know, doing what you do. And there's a story that I'd like you to tell, if you could, about, you know, you're doing a gig basically the night of Istanbul 2005, the European Cup final. So how did that go? Go on.
Well, we were playing the University of East Anglia that night. You know, it's a place I'd played since the beginning of my career. 1977 I played first there. So we were watching, I had a TV, made sure there was a TV backstage. I followed the game, and I'm thinking, you know, well, we got to half time and we're 3-0 down. My production manager said, I think you had it, you know. And I said, well, I don't even want to watch the rest. It looks like a dead and buried here. One goal goes in. I said, you know, got one back, and you're feeling, well, that's a little bit less embarrassing, you know. So second one goes in. Hold on, hold everything now, you know. And then the next thing you know, all of my band and crew are watching it with me. And my guys don't follow football at all, you know. My guys is American. Steve and I, who lives in Paris, they don't follow sport at all. But they love the drama of it. Who couldn't, you know? And then it gets back. And of course we were, I don't know, an hour and a half late going on. The audience were not best pleased, you know, particularly when we opened with You'll Never Walk Alone. Or maybe we closed it, I can't remember. Anyway, they were very disgruntled, and we've never been back. So, but I'll sacrifice, you know, the love of East Anglia for having seen that night, you know. Any
other moments like that where sort of gigs have got in the way of watching the Reds?
I think we've always, you know, that was rare. I mean, the other one that I always remember that's not as glorious was being on stage. I forget where I was now, maybe Glasgow, Oxford, I can't recall now, the night of the Michael Thomas Arsenal game. And I was having my production manager hold up the score from the wings, and, you know, I'm like in the encore of the show, and he's holding up 2-2, and I got, I'll do one more song and we'll be champions. And I turned around from the end of the last song and he's holding up 3-2, 2-3. And that was it, So that was weird because then I had to wait until the next day to see it because you didn't have the internet then,
Yeah.
You did it. People forget we were very lucky now. You see any incident and you can see it from every angle somewhere or another. But everything, that's why it did exist in the imagination. And, descriptions of games even in print were still important then.
Yeah, that's changed.
I tell you that the Liverpool Echo invented emojis. If you think about it, you probably don't remember the footy echo.
The little cop-out thing. Yeah, I do. Yeah, I do remember the footy echo. And
but I mean,
he was like that if you'd won.
But the
and he was down if you'd lost.
And the toffee seller.
Yeah,
if you think about it, that predicted emojis, didn't it? Because they were. You could get to the shop and buy the footy echo having not heard the score.
Yeah.
If you were just that day not able to be near a radio or you couldn't be at the match. So you'd go and that paper would come out and you wouldn't even need to see the headline, you just saw the top of it and that was it.
Well, another incredibly cool thing that I want to ask you about, and for certain people watching, they might not get it, look it up, it's on the internet, you can find it, but a programme that I used to love and I know my mates did was Football Italia. And apparently you found yourself on it. So what happened
did somehow there? They got rid of the fact that I watched it. I was living in Ireland, and at the time of Italia 90, that was when I just moved to Ireland. So I mean that was a very exciting time. I supported the Republic. I really do. I support the Republic still. Really, I've never been an England supporter. So at that time, the whole country were tuned in, but because they were also up against, they went out eventually. Ireland went out to Italy. It made sort of like stars in it, household names out of some of the Italian players, and then Channel 4 started to show Football Italia, and it was a whole new thing. It was like predated all the constant stream of satellite coverage. And somehow somebody got the idea that I, heard that I watched it and I was invited. I didn't need any excuse to go, and I was like, I could speak a few words of Italian. I wouldn't say I could have done it. I could have done anything, but I could understand some things, and it was good fun.
Did you get to have a big fancy coffee with James Richardson?
I did. I had supper with James Richardson, and I'm not so sure that he was really that big a football fan then. I think he was just a television presenter who was given this job. I don't know whether he developed a real knowledge of it. But I mean, we talking about football. I mean, and I'm not so sure how much he knew about football at the time, really. He knew the names of the players, but I'm not sure. When I start talking about the game, I'm not so sure.
Well, I mean, Italian football then and the Premier League now are both sort of pitched as being incredibly sexy, if you like, parts of football. I wanted to also ask you about, because we've got Ian Prowse knocking around here, and he's famous.
Speaking of sexy.
Well, of course, and another famous musician. He's famously a Tranmere fan.
Yeah.
You've got Birkenhead in your heritage.
Well,
so
I mean, the nicest, one of the nicest evenings that I've spent with Ian in the 20 years I've known him was that he came to my mother's 90th birthday at Prenton. And on her 90th birthday, I said, "Mum, do you want to go and see Liverpool play again?" And she hadn't been to the game for years. The last time I'd taken her to Anfield, we'd got beaten by Chelsea at home, and I said, "Mum, you're never coming again. That's it. It's over. And you're bad luck." No, really. I mean, that was just how coincidentally happened to be the way it was. So we arranged to go to the game, and Tranmere were very nice, and they made it. My mum was in a wheelchair, and so they had, they made sure that she had a good spot and everything, and we really had a great time at that game, So I mean, Tranmere, my grandfather was a Tranmere supporter, and it was in the 30s. I mean, it does sound like one of those tales about we lived in a shoebox, but he did used to go at half time, or even like they'd let you in for less money at 15 minutes to go. Those days. Yeah. He was at the famous game against Oldham, where Tranmere held a record for the highest score. They was like 13-4 or something against Oldham. I have the programme from that game.
Brilliant.
My grandfather was at. So I've always kept an eye on Tranmere, because of that, because there was a romantic connection to it. And my dad was friends with the great great centre forward for Tranmere, George Yardley, who passed away last year. And so he was very kind to me. He would get me into games when I was a lad. Actually, I've had the experience of seeing Tranmere reserves play. So, I mean,
wow.
So, you know, when it'd be just like two granddads and a kid and a dog, you know, there wouldn't be a lot of people, you know. And of course, when you go, there was a fellow that used to play midfield for Tranmere in the 60s who was playing centre forward that day, and it was like, I remember him being called offside and yelling out at the top of his voice, "Bollocks!" And it was great, you know, I was a kid and I was like, football, it just said bollocks, because you couldn't hear that at Anfield. They'd probably say all sorts, you couldn't ever hear it, you know. But it made it human level, and I was very grateful for that afternoon, evening, where it was a beautiful, you know, summer evening, pre-season game. You know, a couple of the lads that played for Tranmere, they were not in the league at the time. There's a couple of the lads playing at the back there that I think, you know, they were, to be perfectly honest, compared with the Liverpool side, they looked like they were the answer to who ate all the pies. You know, it was like they were. I think Daniel Sturridge was playing for us then. He looked more concerned he might sit on him than tackle him. You know, like they were big lads, but you know, that's the difference you see. Yeah. I mean, if you stood next to them, they would look super fit. That's what really the shock was, that a lower division player wasn't quite as sleek looking as whoever it was.
I know, I totally know who you mean, but I'm not going to name him. But
I'm not saying against
he's
him.
very good, him, you know.
Who?
He's very good, him on the ball. I think the player you're referencing there. But I wanted to ask you as well, round about the time that we're doing this, I'm not sure when this is going out, so we're actually doing this on election day. But around about this time of year, people look back to, because I think it's 60th anniversary it's coming up to, of when Bill Shankly first got involved in Liverpool. Yeah. And people say sometimes that, you know, we over-romanticise the idea of Shankly and that he's still referenced to this day. But as a long-term Red and someone who is, as we said before, romantic about football.
You know, I'm 2 years off the 60th anniversary of my first trip to Anfield.
Well, there you go. So you're the perfect man to talk about
it. Perfect person to ask that question.
Yeah.
You know,
what do you think the influence is of Bill Shankly on Liverpool Football Club?
I think, you know, the we are Liverpool, this is Anfield, that whole idea, the fact that people still talk about the boot room and things like that, and the continuity, obviously it's totally changed in reality, but the fact that the club itself will still reference it, and it's not just about romanticism, it's because there's got to be some continuity, and he did give it an identity, and I think it's probably carried more these days in the minds of the supporters than it is. Obviously, because you've got a high proportion of people from other parts of the world, but they do have to understand the tradition. Everybody, and I think that's true of other clubs as well. As other clubs, they definitely have a personality. You say that's a Leeds player, that's a Chelsea star player. I mean, I got to see quite a lot of those teams, particularly Chelsea. I saw them a fair bit. In the late 60s, and they did have a style, and there was things you could admire about it, and there were players that played for Everton that would never play for Liverpool, but you couldn't say they were bad players just because they played for our rivals. There were great players that played, they just played a different style, different philosophy. So I do think that's right to keep hold of it without over-romanticising it and becoming entitled to it, because the effort's still got to be in there. But that's why people like Trent, they like Stevie Gerrard, and Jamie Carragher, because they were from the city, and that's important. That's why people like, you know, when Curtis Jones put that penalty in, you know, against Arsenal, I went, that's great. I mean, you've been at the club since you were 9. Can you imagine how calm you have to be to take the penalty that insolently in that moment? You know, where you're going to win the game. You could easily blow it. You know,
it was scoused the way it took it as well.
Think about Italia 90 and Roberto Baggio, the best player in the world at the time probably, puts it up in the sky. There's a kid, as he is, and to me he's a kid, right? He's 18 or something. To have that presence of mind, to be able to do that then, is very impressive. And of course you love it all the more because you know he's local. Yeah. You know, and it sort of gives it the connection, you know. I mean, but even when Shankly, the thing is that there's no point in saying that it's all about Liverpool, because the first thing Shankly did when he came was go and get a bunch of players from Scotland that could win the bloody promotion and then win the title. Successive seasons, by the way. Yeah. successive seasons, second division, first division, cup. Very nearly won the double in that 65, you know.
But it was about how he held himself as well, wasn't it? And it is the way he was a leader, and also his politics. And I wanted to briefly ask you about politics because it is general election day, and so it seems only fair. Shankly obviously was a socialist. There's the famous quotes that are still, quoted to this day. I've noticed in the build-up to this election that a lot of people have talked about, what's the place for politics in football. There've obviously been banners at Liverpool matches, vote Labour, etc., and things like that. That's seemingly annoyed some people, not me, by the way. But you're someone who, you've got your career and you've wrote a song, which some people may not know, but look it up. You wrote a song about Thatcher. Did you ever think when you were doing it, I shouldn't do this, politics isn't part of this, this might not be the right direction for my career?
Just the other day, something happened that, they have an annual arts award in America called the Kennedy Honors, and they give it to people from, the theatre, cinema, music. Now, they have a big dinner celebrating the recipients of this deal, and Mike Pompeo, as the Secretary of State, was referring to Linda Ronstadt, who was one of the American singer, referring to her and saying, when I travel around the world, he said, I think, when will I be loved? Because that's one of the hits she had. And she got up and said, well, maybe you'll be loved when you stop enabling Donald Trump. Now, normally you'd have a situation where people say, you're abusing your platform in music to make a point about politics. But isn't it the other way around? It's the politician who made the cheap joke about music in order to make himself look cool. You see that constantly in today's politics or throughout the world. But the problem with populism is that it's the people that represent populism are not of the people. They're pretending to represent the people. Yeah. Therefore, you get a Boris Johnson who tries to make himself look like a human with empathy by going and delivering milk,
Or hiding in the fridge.
Or hiding in the fridge. But when he goes to the NHS ward and gets asked a difficult question, he can't answer it. Now, does it inherently make the other side the answer to all our dreams? Obviously not. Every party, you could critique every group of people. But the example of whether you have the right to comment is really embodied in that first story, is that the politicians will use any trick, whatever side of the divide they're on, to get their point across. And they're not above using a gimmick. A slogan is a gimmick. You know what? I'd put more store by a good song's lyric and a good melody to make people moved, not to make change, but just to matter to somebody in a moment, than I would, look at all the slogans over the years that have been used. You've never had it so good. Labour isn't working, or the Tories aren't working, whichever it is. There's elements of truth and lie in both of them, but you're not going to go to your grave singing any of those hook lines. But you might some song, That might be the one that carries you out the door.
Yeah. And it might resonate, yeah. One last football question then to wrap up. You've obviously watched a lot of Liverpool sides, a lot of Liverpool managers, a lot of Liverpool players. Where do you rank the class of 2019? How good is this side that we're watching right now?
When you're watching them, and they don't play exactly like another side, but there's times when you just go, well, this is as good as I've ever seen. The goal that Salah scored against Salzburg, the kind of geometry of it looks impossible.
Unbelievable, yeah.
You think back a little bit, you remember Robbie Fowler did things like that, There are times when it looks like the kind of, the interchange of the, teams with John Barnes and Rush and McDermott and Sinnes. It's that kind of understanding. I mean, I think when all the parts of it, but it's, the volume of games they're playing now, because you've got like 5 competitions right now, it makes it necessary for the manager to have the discipline and the knowledge that he holds and his team holds. We're all going, why didn't they play such and such? Even if we know a little bit of the backstage gossip, we don't really know who's carrying an injury or to what extent. It was fairly evident that Salah was struggling for a couple of games, and then he gets over the injury, and suddenly he's doing amazing things again. You know, you get a player like Keita, who everybody's been expecting, and then he actually does what everybody thought he could do, and you go, well, why isn't he in every week? Who knows, you know? But the one thing about those sides of the past is there was a lot of consistency. I mean, sometimes in the Shankly era, there was the same team all the time.
Yeah.
Very rarely they didn't seem to get the same injuries. They also weren't playing as many games. So maybe, you know, maybe that's why.
Yeah.
I mean, and the players are younger as well. Some of the players are reaching peaks and getting into at 20. Not so many players played at 20. And players don't play, with the exception of James Milner, who you feel could play until he's 50.
Forever,
you know?
yeah.
I mean, he's so incredibly fit. You know, have you read his book?
Yeah, it's good, isn't it?
It's great, isn't
it's
it?
fantastic.
Yeah. It's a tremendous book. Yeah.
So, are we going to do it? Is this our year? As people always say, we say even though we don't. But will it be? Do you think?
I want to believe it is this year because I think it makes a big difference. I'm a purist about the European Cup. You know, I think the European Cup should be the champions against the champions. But I understand why the Champions League was developed, because it's a money thing, it's a television thing, and it's been entertaining. And we wouldn't want it any other way because of Istanbul and last year. And if we get the 7th one this year, that would put us like on the trail of Real Madrid, wouldn't it? You know. But I think most everybody would, if you had to trade, you'd trade the Premier League, the title.
Well, we've waited so long, haven't we? We've waited so long.
Too long.
Yeah,
too long. And I also think that if they win one, then that could be that truly could be the beginning of saying this side is you know, because you know it looked when they came so close under Rodgers, you know that looked like a good side. It looked capable, but in the end it just faltered in the key way. But now you really feel like the team will go all the way, and once they win one, then I think they are a side that everybody goes, well, how do you beat this side? You know, yeah.
Let's hope so. Let's hope that's what happens. Thanks very much for coming in today and giving us some time. That has been another one-on-one interview from the Anfield Wrap. Hope you enjoyed it. And if you did, please share it. Please tell other people. And if you've never listened to Elvis, what are you doing? Have a listen. Up the Reds.